There are more ways to celebrate than ever before at the Jeep Celebration event. Hurry in for great deals today on the only brand that lets you go anywhere and do anything. And right now, get $1,500 total cash allowance on the purchase of a 2022 Jeep Compass Latitude 4x4. Don't miss this great offer. Go to Jeep.com to find your local dealer. Hurry into the Jeep Celebration event today. Residency restrictions apply. Must take retail delivery by 5/2/22. Jeep is a registered trademark of FCA US LLC.
Hi there, I am Adem Kirbas. I am here in Turkey, in Ordu. It is July. I hope you all are doing fine. We are still in the pandemic, and that you will take care of yourself. Today we will continue with male culturalism, this cultural gender of man. The last time we only some sort of analyzed the perspective of migrants. I do admit this is only the perspective of migrants, of blackness, and how we should consider blackness. This is, like I said, a bit different, and we have to consider this in a separate episode, because it is very important because of its because of recent events, as well as of its different development, and it deserves special scrutiny. However, and today we will talk about male gender, male culturalism from a white European perspective. I will occasionally use whiteness and being European synonymously. They are interchangeable, because no matter what those Americans, what white Americans think of themselves, they are descendants of white Europeans. These are descendants of white European culture, and this is and it is European culture for a fact, and I will partially use them synonymously. However, we have to talk, before we go into detail, we have to talk about a little bit of history, because like my understanding is that no belief whatsoever can be pure imagination. That is, indeed, every belief, every assumption is partially founded in reality, and this is not different with whiteness, because whiteness does not come from anywhere. It has its foundation in history, in our daily lives. We have to be aware that half of a millennia, this was the history of white dominance on the globe, and to this very day, European or white European, they are the ruling elite, if you want. They still rule the world. So history, if you want, is two-part history of whiteness and Europeans in TV, pop culture, and so on. I mean, of course, one of the reasons why whiteness is so far spread is because of the invention of pictures, is because of imagery, and this imagery came into existence, especially with paintings, and later on with the book print. Other cultures like Islam, for example, did had or have a different approach to pictures. It is rather forbidden. So this goes back to Platonism. Platon was an ardent hate of or an enemy of every pictures because he thought it would some sort of corrupt someone's mind and it would deceive someone and would lead him to wrong paths, especially this idea and that you no matter what can never decipher or some sort of manifest the idea in reality. This has its origin in Platonism. However, we have to be aware of one thing, that Europe and European powers conquered, destroyed, annexed almost the entire world. This starts with European conquest of the Americas, as well as in Africa, and then later Asia. Well, before Africa, it was Asia actually. However, and this led to the belief that being European means being white, as well as it is being used synonymously with being superior to other cultures, other traditions whatsoever. It was proven on the battlefield. The superior army has won. This is something we find in the antiquity as well. Alexandros or Alexander the Great's army, they were actually not real Greeks, rather Macedonians, however, but they won over this vastly Persian army, and thus they proved themselves and the world that they are superior and that their culture in effect are superior. And like we said it before, many of these understandings of the East comes from ancient Greek. So how the ancient Greek portrayed Persians and barbarians, this is still the case today. This is still, we pretty much, the world whiteness as well as Europeans pretty much use these perspectives on others, like the ancient Greeks did. I mean, it is indeed worth asking why, how could this happen? Because you have to be aware of one thing, that Europe was pretty much the backwaters of civilization. I mean, back in the days, especially with the rise of Islam, the Islam were very prosperous society, but as well as China, you could say the Chinese as well as Indian economy they were far more sophisticated than the European economies. And up to the eve of the Opium Wars, Europe had nothing to offer to the Chinese people but drugs. So the Chinese economy was superior, as well as would always make surpluses compared to others. So all this silver, Spanish silver from the New World would be imported to China and then exchanged for silk and other goods, and this silk then the Spaniards would sell in Europe. So China was the dominating power. However, how could Europe conquer a very sophisticated culture? This is the same question in the antiquity, because Greece was way more sophisticated than Rome, and the Romans pretty much took over Greek culture. So the Roman culture, you cannot think of Roman culture independently of Greek culture, yet this Roman force, this Roman power could conquer Greece, this higher developed civilization. And this was partially true for Europeans, but one thing was of course, that the world, some sort of the industrial revolution was the initiation, you could say, of European dominance in the world, and its technological development, because then technological development happened faster, and it was more predictable. It had some sort of normal cycles, like a product cycles. You could depend on it. But however, what is, I think, way more important is that Europe was a very bloody continent. Wars would happen there very commonly. So if you know a bit of history, then you know that in Europe, most of the wars were fought in Europe. Europe was constant in war, and through these constant wars, Europe became very much sophisticated in warfare in comparison to China. China had some very phases in its history, where one of them was these four kingdoms, and these were phases where people would stage constant war against each other, but yet these stages or phases ended, and then you could see in partially that China would turn to pacifism. They would even destroy weapons and so on. So whereas in Europe, every technological development was used on the battlefield, was used some sort of to get an overedge of your enemy on the battlefield. In Europe's issues and problems, they were solved on the battlefield. This may help you to understand why a culture which you could say was inferior to other cultures at that time, especially in Asia, how could they in the end conquer world empires. This was the case with the Huns. The Huns conquered a lot of empire, as well as the Mongols. The Mongols conquered China, despite the fact that they were not as much as civilized as Chinese, and as well as other cultures. However, and from this, we talked about this, the male gender, especially of Europeans, derived from a soldier ethos, some sort of being, or the military was for a long time some sort of the role model, how a European man should behave and conduct himself. This started in the antiquity, you could say partially in Greece, later in the Roman Empire. The Romans, they were thrown through a very militaristic society. You could see in Greece this simplistic lifestyle we talked about, is the obedience, unison, and so on. And this was always in separation to others, to barbarians. And Europeans were very violent, and this is despite the fact that Europeans themselves never really considered themselves as violent, as barbarians. Nevertheless, someone else and would have considered them as barbarians. For example, when the Spanish conquistadors came to the New World, they were partially revered as gods, true, but nevertheless, as well as very violent, greedy, because they all wanted to have gold and so on. Because the self-understanding of Europeans was actually being superior, being civilized. Again, you have to be aware of one thing. I mean, if you win on the battlefield, you may be a barbarian, whatever. Nevertheless, this is a fact, and this proves, and especially if you win outnumbered, then this has indeed a very effect on to your psyche, but as well as technological advancement and so on. But of course, one asks or should ask himself here, why did those Europeans some sort of use violence, and we all know about atrocities Europeans committed in Africa, in the New World, in Asia. Most of these acts, even you have to call them genocides and so on. But why were these so-called civilized people so violent, especially violent against others, or especially then when in Europe you could see enlightenment in Europe after French Revolution, as well as before that, during the Enlightenment, everyone was considered a brother as equals and so on. But this did not extend to other cultures and civilizations. There is actually a lot of interesting literature about this. This is called multiculturalism, and so on. How Europeans view themselves and how Europeans view others. But to sum it up, you could say Europeans did not consider other cultures as equals, rather that they felt that they are superior to them, and because of their superiority, they did not think that they would be ethically or morally obliged to or would have to be treat them as equals. Moral and equal ethical codes did not apply to them, and it was of course violence was in a way necessary, because Europeans had this self-understanding that they would spread enlightenment through the world, so that they would come with good intentions, would bring peace and civilization to these new cultures. And this of course was a disguise. It was a disguise of exploitation. These new cultures, the people wanted to exploit them. Europe needed markets for their fast grown industrial age, or in the industrial areas. Europe needed resources and so on. I mean, one famous example I mentioned was before Europe colonized Africa, there was always this notion that, and this was after slavery was banned, there was always this notion that they would want to help Africans to achieve a higher civilization, that in Africa a second Europe would be created and so on. So all this notion, but this would always, but this had only one goal, and this was to disguise their real intentions, and this was really exploit those countries, because the European industries, they just needed a lot of resources, and this was mainly the cause. And this meant, of course, every opposition to this European presumed civilization, to this attempt of civilizing other countries, was being considered as an attempt to thwart progress and enlightenment, and then this would further justify violence against other people, even atrocities, brutal murders, and so on. And again, in these colonies and in these worlds, European militarism was actually the leading force. It was partially economic, indeed. Think about the East India Company, who piece by piece conquered India. It was the East India Company who actually pretty much was or laid the groundwork for the conquest of India, but nevertheless it was the technologically advanced European military which could win over those armies of others, and then of course this European militaristic lifestyle became first of all successful, but as well as some sort of a leading male role model, and this meant that European militarism or militaristic gender, if you want, was then used simultaneously with being European, having European attitudes, having European virtues, and this was, for example, Europeans are in control, meaning that the foreigners, they are like children. This is very common. This is happening actually very common, that foreigners are being considered emotionally as weak, as gullible and almost children. But Europeans, these grown-up men, they take charge of it. They are in control. Another thing was that Europeans are laborers. This was rather to justify the conquest of these new areas. Think of Australia. One key argument of the British for conquering Australia, and some sort of stating that the Aborigines, they would not really own the land, was because that the Aborigines, that they would not be laborers, that they do not work the field, that they do not and therefore live a nomadic life, and that the Brits can conquer this piece of land, and that it would not belong to the native population, because they would not make agriculture and so on, so that they were lazy, and in a way this would justify European conquest. Another thing was, of course, Europeans are intellectually advanced. Again, this was partially fought on the battlefield, in that sense that European armies were indeed, not always, but mostly outnumbered, yet they were technologically advanced, but yet still Europeans fought or had this self-assurance that they were intellectually more superior, they were more witty, and so on. They had better weapons, and this then led to a belief, some sort of European invincibility. They could win every battles. I mean, understandably, if you have superior weapons, but as well as that they would have intellectual prowess, and in some instances, especially in the New World and in Africa, they would some sort of come to tribes or civilizations which somehow or lived outside this economic sphere, or outside this economic sphere, and so on, and then they would be considered as underdeveloped, or they would still live in other different civil societies, which for the for many Europeans was considered inferior, because it was not their society. It could not compare to their society. And lastly, that the Europeans some sort of would bring civilization to this new world. This was partially again the military. So the military, especially you could say after the French Revolution, then the military was some sort of seen and considered as the bastion for liberal ideas for modern thoughts and so on. This is, by the way, true in some countries to this very day. In Turkey, for example, to this very day, the military has been considered the bastion of liberalism and equality or leftism in that sense. And European understanding, of course, nurtured itself from this how they have been perceived by others, as well as how they are perceived themselves. And then, of course, now in this European power, this invincibility, then was taken over in the New Age and then started to crumble. It was challenged, especially after the First and Second World War, where people said, why do civilized countries wage war against each other? So this European superiority as well as whiteness was then started to being challenged. It became some sort of cracks. Cracks appeared despite the fact of the rise of the Americas, and especially with globalization. This narration of white superiority was challenged with the rise of other powers outside of the European sphere, whereas America as well as Canada are to be considered some sort of an extension of this European imperial past. However, this male narration or this male superiority was challenged. This led to a disparity within this white European self-understanding. Parts of it thought that they were betrayed of something, that they were being, or that they are being deprived of their superiority. And now, with the rise of other groups, this male gender then had to compete with others. So whiteness is even today it is being challenged. There are a lot of narrations and literature written about it now with the second Black Lives Matter movement and so on. It is still being questioned, this white and European superiority. But nevertheless, male culturalism as well as this gender sees some sort of other cultures as inferior, that they would need to catch up. European culture is being considered as the measurement, as well as the measurement for success, as well as the measurement for other cultures, that they would be, or that other cultures would have to catch up to these European cultures. Make no mistake about it. This is not only the far right groups or whatever who think that, not at all, as well as leftist narrations think that as well. I will talk about it shortly, so that, but especially in combination with feminism, they think that other cultures are indeed inferior, and that the European culture, for what it stands for, would be the measurement, or is some sort of where you can measure successful civilization, successful development. And this male culturalism, from one perspective, especially whiteness as we know it today, they try to preserve the past, because after their challenge, you could say, this glorification of the past is not possible in that way anymore, or that it is being challenged, chided on, and so on. And now this new whiteness or tries to preserve it, and non-whites are still being considered as inferior. And this has some sort of, you could say this is especially true for a feminist part in the male culturalism. I mean, we talked about it in the antiquity. There were already some narrations about foreigners, about Persians, and so on, and they always portrait, especially the Greek culture, always portrait the Persian cultures as despotic, as undemocratic, and so on. And this has persisted to this very day, and this has especially had an effect on female emancipation, especially that some feminist groups, some male feminist groups think that the foreign man, or that the woman would be kept dependent from the man in other cultures, that other cultures did not go so far to emancipate and free the woman, that they still have this despotic narrative that the man would rule over the woman. And this then somehow permeated or came to the conclusion that European man, those white men, need to save this poor woman of the hands of the despot who is exploiting the woman for its own sake. So this is some sort of, you could say that some sexist and chauvinist people, as well as elements, use feminism against other people, against migrants in their narration, and especially with the emancipation of the woman in the West. Some sort of male dominance over the woman was questioned. The woman could do a lot, does not need saving, especially Western women emancipated themselves from men. The women, especially the second wave of feminism, did without men. They were indeed very successful. However, so this female emancipation in the West led some sort of Sikh men to know new areas where they still can maintain their manhood, and their manhood was indeed what you can see in TV, movies, in comics, in cultures, literatures. This is this hero narrative. The man is the savior of the world. This is what male gender nourishes itself from, and with these new cultures which are being considered as inferior to the European cultures, these men then can still live their hero fantasies. They can still live or cling on this narration of the old world, that the man who saves the poor maiden becomes acknowledged and recognized as a man. You could see this in some datings and so on. There are some men in the West who, if asked why they wanna date women from other countries, I mean, this is not all. I mean, don't get me wrong. This is some men say this. Some men, you would assume that they have some other intentions. However, and they were asked why they were do not want European women to date, or why they do not wanna date European women, and they mostly answer that European women, they would not know morale, they were different and so on, that they would not appreciate family and so on. So this is where you see some sort of, in Europe, the emancipation is being very progressed. The European woman, I mean, this is rather, I would say, exaggerated, but it is some sort of a presumption that the European woman would not need a hero. She is the heroine herself. And however, now man, in order to outlive this hero fantasy that they are being taught up, as well as this soldier, about the past, because nevertheless the past, Europe's imperial and colonial past, is present in Europe itself as well. So not only on other countries. So it's not that migrants and blacks in the US are daily reminded of being foreign or alien. It is as well as Europeans themselves are daily reminded that they either have once ruled the world, that the world was was conquered by their ancestors. This gives them some sort of a different approach to the world. And however, there is still this other cultures are being considered, where you some sort of have to save the woman. You can save the day and some sort of relive the past of your ancestors, this glorious past. I will talk about male nostalgia in the next episode. However, what I want to talk about briefly is the situation in Austria and Germany, because this is what I witnessed from first-hand side. And there you can see, as well as this male culturalism, gender, because Middle Eastern man, this is always in Austria as well as in Germany, this is mainly an issue between East and West, between Orient and Occident, between Christianity and Islam. Or this is very, you could say, this is some sort of the clash, or the policy clash, or cleavage, if you want, in the society. And there Middle Eastern men are being considered as despotic. They are the sole reason why integration does not work. Middle Eastern man would prevent the liberation of women. Or a couple of years ago, even the LGBT community in Germany stated that Middle Eastern men, or some of them, I would not say all of them, but this LGBTQ community stated that Middle Eastern man would be the sole reason, or one of the reasons why they cannot live or outlive their sexuality, that Middle Eastern man would be the cause why the society would become some sort of more conservative entities, as well as with those with Syrians coming to Austria as well as to Germany, then all these rape allegations and so on. So Middle Eastern men would be aggressive, they would be despotic, they are rapists, and that the Middle Eastern woman, she's poor, she cannot defend herself, and she needs to be saved from the hand of the tyrant. And if it happens the other way around, for example, when a Middle Eastern man engages in a relationship with an Austrian or German woman, no one really assumes that this is love or anything, rather that this is being considered as rape, or that this is assumably happening against this Austrian and German woman's will, and so on. So this is still persistent, and this is again this narration between East and West, and this goes back thousands of years. It goes back into the antiquity and probably earlier. And so to sum it up, this meant that male culturalist gender seeks new niches, new areas where they can assert their superiority, their whiteness, where they can relive their past, their glorious past, because you have to be aware that many adventure novels, many literature, movies, everyone you see, there's always one protagonist, one hero, mostly white, and who then saves the day, saves the world, is the hero, and gets the girl. This is how this all works. If you want to write a bestseller, you better go along this path. I'm not saying that all bestsellers are that way, but it is the cultural heritage. This is what is understandable, and so white men then some sort of are being considered as loving because they are all the opposite of this despotic man who suppress their women. So in contrast to that is the white man. He's loving, he's caring, he's a feminist. This is important. He saves the woman from the hands of this despot, of this tyrant. He's a hero, and he lives a very simplistic life, militaristic. He knows order. This is as well as very important. Every time Europeans go into it, especially this is true for Germans. The Germans always assume that Germans would bring some order, structure, so that they would be therefore indispensable. Without Germans, as well as Austrians, nothing work. And I made this experience in the university as well, because every time when I would work with Germans or Austrians, then I would immediately be subordinated, so that there was some sort of tension, and if I would then some sort of assert myself through my knowledge, then I would be considered as an egoist, and so on. So it was always, you have still this driving force of this male culturalism or whiteness to be superior, to wanting to be superior, because this is part of their culture. This is how they are being brought up. This is how you understand yourself, and this is again, it is still part of the modern society, and this is how manliness is actually being perpetrated, and still is being considered as a role model. So as a man, if you of course value the past, because these new genders, or the script for these new genders was not written yet. You don't have much alternative, and this is the reason why you still look in the past. You still try to emulate those past accomplishments, and this past accomplishment this is something you have to admit, because this is founded in the reality. This was about Europeans ruling the world, conquering. It was indeed hideous. It was questionable. Nevertheless, this is what people never see. People do not see the atrocities. No, they rather see the good, the positive, and this is then what we will talk about: male nostalgia. This was Adam Kievas from Urdu. Thank you for listening, and take care of yourself. Bye.
It's finally time to start firing up the grill. From city to shore, Acme is everything you need to prep for this summer season. Download the Acme app to shop for this season's essentials any way you want. Open the Acme app, clip your deals, then order your items online. An experienced Acme associate will carefully select your groceries, bag your order and bring it right to your car or deliver right to your door. Download the app or visit acmemarkets.com for program details.